Privilege to serve in this capacity with you all, some of the most incredible people on the face of the planet. If you're a guest with us, I don't know you yet, so I can't make that claim about you, but I can tell you, you are around some of the most incredible people on the planet. We are so thrilled to have you, and we trust you will feel completely at home. And more than anything, our dream is to learn what it looks like to show and share the love of Jesus Christ, and we hope that you will feel and sense the love of Jesus even as you are in this place. We are in the third week of a conversation, a series that we are calling Unafraid, and in this series we are really pressing into the question, what might it look like if we lived life a little less afraid? What might that look like? What kinds of decisions might I make or make differently? What kinds of risks might I be willing to take that maybe previously I wasn't willing to take because I was afraid? Who might I invite over to my home for dinner if I wasn't afraid? What area of brokenness in the world around me might I be more prone to address because I see it if I wasn't so afraid? What kind of a fun trip might you say yes to taking with your crazy high school friends if you weren't as afraid? What might it look like if we lived life a little less afraid? It's such a great question for a variety of reasons. One of the primary reasons being, even though it often functions in the background like an operating system that is powering the apps of our lives, we are also often driven by fear in ways that are conscious, in ways that are unconscious. We'll talk about that a little bit today. The good news is, no matter who you are, no matter where you happen to be on your journey or your struggle with fear, I can tell you it is possible for you to live life victorious over fear. It is possible for you to live life a little less afraid. And one of the reasons I know that is because Jesus said one time, this is in Matthew chapter 14 verse 27, talking to his followers, he said, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." I'm just kidding. He didn't say it one time. Matter of fact, it is the most repeated command in the Bible. About 365 different times in one way or another, the Bible invites us out of places of fear, which is such an awesome thing because it has to me. God will not command what he will not enable us to experience. So if he's saying, more than anything else, do not be afraid, we have to believe he will give us all it takes to live life victorious over fear. But I thought this morning we'd talk a little bit about fear and how it works in us. Last week we talked a little bit about fear and how it works in our relationships with each other, but we want to take some time to talk about the anatomy of fear, the internal workings of fear, because here's something that I know. If we don't grow to understand something, it's really difficult to battle against it meaningfully. So we want to kind of pull back the veil on fear to see it for what it is, to understand its function, the way it works a little bit better. And then we'll talk about, what are some steps we can start to take immediately to combat and address that in us. There are a lot of psychological and philosophical aspects and layers to the idea of fear. But simply put, fear is the internal response to a perceived threat. In fact, we'll put some definitions so you can see it. Fear is the internal response to a perceived threat. We talked about some of this about 2.5 years ago, but man, the season and the time seems like it would be really good for us to revisit some of this. An internal response to a perceived threat. Whenever we believe that something is positioned to hurt us or to cause us any amount of harm, that instinctive internal response is called fear. Maybe you've experienced it. Please not this again. I'm so scared of this thing. God, please. So let's talk about fear's anatomy. So first thing, we want to talk about the nature. Rent than what I'm doing right now. All right, that's better. That's cool. Andrew, my friend, can you point me to which mic I should grab in the event that this perpetuates, and I will follow your instructions? How's it doing right now? Okay, I'll keep this one. He said with confidence, and I believe you, brother. Okay. The nature of fear. I think we have some slides to go along with this, maybe not. The nature of fear. In case you missed it, I referred to fear as instinctive. Instinctive, because I don't know if you knew this, but if you are a human being, fear is natural. Fear is completely natural. It's a part of your default factory setting. God wired you with a fear instinct. It is natural. Whether you know it or not, whether you feel it often internally or you don't, fear is a part of who you are as a person. And there is nothing wrong with you because you feel afraid. Something I, as a man, have probably needed to hear all of my life. There is nothing wrong with you because you feel afraid. And I think that in a desire to help God's people to live a little less afraid, we can end up helping God's people to live a little more ashamed of the fact that we feel these feelings of fear. And you need to know fear is a natural part of who you are. If you feel fear, let me perhaps be the first person to say to you, congratulations on your humanity. If you don't experience fear, I'm afraid of you, psycho. There are benefits to fear, believe it or not. And it doesn't take much thought to see why God might have wired us with a fear instinct. It's not just natural, fear is useful. Man, when I was a kid, I can still remember playing outside by the front porch in front, again, of our home. And, barefoot, as I tended to do. And, man, I felt a tickle on my right foot. I can still remember this decades later. I looked down. There is a slithery serpent just making itself at home on my foot. I proceeded to say, ah, like that. And it has been my response anytime I see a snake ever since. I think I just worked out why I'm so afraid of snakes in the last little bit. I absolutely freaked out because it's a snake. To some of you, I have to explain that a little more, which is concerning. Fear is how you recognize and respond to danger. It's actually a safety survival mechanism that God has given us. It's why you are still alive, because you often recognize something as potentially harmful. And internally, something happened that allowed you to take appropriate steps. Now, although it's natural and beneficial, it's really interesting that we don't all have similar fear triggers. We all experience fear, but what triggers fear in me may not necessarily trigger fear in you. It's interesting. As I share the story of a snake on my foot, there is likely someone in this room who's like, "Aw, cute little snakey," because something is wrong with you, right? That just won't bother you at all. For me, I'm afraid of snakes and cat hair because it's weird and I think it's poisonous. I don't know. Whereas for some of you, you may be terrified of people and social settings. So the truth is, to walk into a church service like this, you are wrestling with a little bit of fear. Some of you look at me and think, I can't believe you're scared of snakes. And if I said, would you mind stepping on the stage and introducing yourself? You would say, ah! Because the idea of standing up and talking in front of people would trigger fear in you. What triggers fear in you may not trigger fear in me, but we all experience this God-given human response. Some of you are terrified of change. Some of you are terrified of the same old, same old. You've got to create something, got to mix things up just because. Some of you are scared of commitment. That's why you haven't put a ring on it yet. Some of you are scared of sickness. Some of you are scared of flying, which is a rational fear if you ask me. Metal tube and everything hurling through the sky. That makes sense. Some of you are scared of girls. Some of you are scared of singleness. Some of you are scared of marriage. Some of you are scared of betrayal. Yeah, thank you. Some of you are scared of government overreach. Some of you are scared of becoming a grandma too soon, right? There are different things that are going to trigger fear in different ones of us. Just because I'm not freaked out by what freaks you out doesn't mean I don't experience fear. Again, fear is natural. Our triggers may be different. Tempting to feel and think in a conversation like this, like, well, I don't feel fear very often, which often means I'm not typically afraid of the things most people in our culture are afraid of. But there is something that triggers fear in you. You may not readily identify what it is, but something does. Again, for you, it may be being ordinary. It may be the fear of being out of control, which is one of the reasons why you just resist feeling much of anything. You know, feelings mess up with things. You got to deal with facts alone and, stay in your head to avoid those experiences. I think it is interesting that during the lockdown, many of us discovered fears I don't think we knew we had. There were so many triggers thrown at us in the last couple of years that many of us found ourselves feeling things we had not felt before. We had managed to insulate it, living in very controlled environments, and all kinds of triggers surprised us. Some of us discovered that we're afraid of present parenting. Like, man, I've gone so many years being able to use busyness as an excuse, and now I'm physically at home with my children, and it terrifies me. I realize, like, looking my spouse in the eye for extended periods of time, like intimacy, scares me a little bit. I found out now that we're in this close proximity, and I can't say I have a meeting to run off to. Some of us discovered that not being busy terrified us. I'm used to constantly distracting myself, and all of a sudden, a lot of these things have been removed. For many of us, we discovered, man, uncertainty is a scary thing. I used to feel like I could see 5 years ahead of me, and all of a sudden, I can't see 5 hours. And I'm starting to feel some of that. Anyway, I wonder what triggers fear in you, and if you are aware of what that is. Fear, when it triggers in us, it shows up at different levels. There are different levels to the fear that we experience. And I think this is really helpful for me. We all experience fear at different levels on a scale, and I think this will help some of us. There are levels like the unconscious level of fear. An unconscious level of fear. This is, I have fear, but I don't feel afraid. So I think fear doesn't apply to me because, again, it's not an acute feeling that I'm wrestling with on a constant basis. But again, fear can be unconscious. I'll give you an example. The fear of failure is not often this feeling in your chest, but it lingers in an unconscious place, keeping you from trying things lest you look like a fool and validate the words of your father that you will never. The fear of rejection, that's not a fear that we live with like in this terrified sense. No, that can often be an unconscious thing that maybe shows up when a trigger relationally. Man, I like this person, or I would like to be friends with this person, but I don't want to. And then I might feel a little bit of that, and I just avoid it and go do something else. Unconscious fear. Uneasy fear. This is the level at which I may start to feel fear, feel uncomfortable. If you ask me, I probably wouldn't use the word afraid. You know, it's kind of like if you ask a Christian, are you angry? No, no, no. Frustrated. Right? It's the same thing, maybe in your mind at a different level. This is kind of like that. Uneasy. Well, I wouldn't use the word afraid, but something doesn't look right about that situation. I don't love how she's staring at me kind of aggressively. You know, my mom used my middle name. I'm feeling a little uncomfortable right now. Boss asked to meet with me. I'm uneasy. I don't yet have this compulsion to do anything differently, but I'm starting to feel a little uneasy. Then there's scared fear. This is typically when we would call it fear. Now I'm convinced there is an active threat. It's not just perceived. No, something is very, very, very actively threatening me. There's a snake on my foot and I feel scared. Somebody told me what they intend to do and I feel afraid. I saw a report on the news that suggested this is how. I read the statistics and they are telling me, and now I'm feeling scared, compelled to do something. And then there's dread fear. Now I'm beyond afraid, and I'm resigning to worst case scenarios. I'm bracing for the inevitable impact. This thing is going to hurt me. It's coming. I'm terrified. It's just a matter of time. That's when you start to experience dread. It's fear when it marries itself to helplessness. And then there's what I would refer to as this phobic level of fear. This is when fear now lives inside of me. I imbibe fear. I experience intense fear about things that aren't even actively in front of me. The fear is now just almost a part of my inner system. I'm constantly afraid of something at a high level. It's this lingering phobia. I've seen some of this in the church. I've seen some of this in our culture. It's just this lingering phobia. It's just this buzz in me. Something is wrong, and something is broken, and something is wrong, and something is going to destroy. And it's just this constant. It doesn't seem to let up or go away. It's almost like life is a trigger, and it's just living on repeat. It's also worth saying, while we're talking about the anatomy of fear, that we all experience fear, but the symptoms, when we start to feel it, when it shows up in us, it's going to have a different look for different ones of us, right? For some of us, it's, my heart starts to race. That's actually true for most of us. My heart starts to beat faster. In fact, sometimes that's how I know I'm scared. That's my clue that I'm feeling afraid. Or you may start to sweat in different places. Your mouth may become dry, or breathing might become labored. You're having a hard time breathing. And for some of you, that's how you know, like, I'm having a hard time, and people have to tell, like, just breathe, relax, right? You may suddenly feel emotional, angry or sad. That's how fear may manifest itself in you. You may feel nauseous. You may feel like, how shall we say, weakened faculties. Like your bladder, you have to go to the restroom, right? Big meeting coming up. Always in the restroom, right? That's one of the ways fear shows up in you. Muscles may tighten, or you may start to feel disoriented or irrational. I have one kid, when they get scared, they just start rambling. Like it's video-worthy stuff. Like it is just incoherent rambling, right? Just becoming very, very irrational in the way we speak. Okay, one more observation, and then we're going to look at a biblical illustration. The response, the fear response. When you start to experience all of these symptoms in your body, it's interesting. That's just your body preparing to respond to fear. Because when fear stirs in you, you always respond. Always. And when you start to feel like you're sweating, or your muscles are tightening up, or you're starting to feel agitated, or your heart is starting to race fast, your body is just readying you to respond in one of three ways that you've heard about: either fight, flight, or freeze. Did somebody say fun? Fawn. Okay. Is that a deer? You can tell me about that. But the symptoms are getting my body to either stand up and fight the threat, run like crazy because not today, or play possum, right? Fear is preparing my body to respond. And fight, by the way, may look a lot of different ways. It is, by the way, why a lot of us will lie when we're afraid. It's the way I'm fighting against this becoming the possible outcome, or denying, or getting angry, or taking a physical swing at someone, or making sure my concealed carry permit is valid. Like, I am going to get ready to fight or to run. I'm going to skip town. I'm going to walk out of this relationship. I'm going to unfriend this person. I'm going to avoid you from now on. If I see you in the grocery store, man, I'm going the other way. That's my flight response. Or freeze, which could mean like, man, I cry, or I beg, or I bargain, or I just quit trying and brace for the inevitable. Again, this to me is really interesting as I think about what the Bible says about fear, and as I think about what it looks like to live a little less afraid. By the way, you may exaggerate a lot, right? And people may say, you exaggerate often. Isn't it interesting that most of us wouldn't think that's actually a symptom of fear? That is actually a fear response. That is a fight response to the fear of feeling small, for instance, right? Or you may yell at your kids because you're so scared that something is going to happen to them, right? It freaks you out, and your response is to rage. Don't do that. If you ever do that, why? Because I'm scared something is going to happen to them. And so the way that shows up is in raging, which sometimes is just an evidence that I'm feeling deeply afraid. But we may not identify it as such. Or she's just such an angry parent. Or you move from friend group to friend group, and you've not had the same friends for more than 3 years ever. Right? Scared of rejection. I'm going to leave you before you leave me. And so I'm constantly moving on. That may just be a response to fear. Some of you, it may be that you're super indecisive. And that's all you ever talk about, is how indecisive you are. But you never actually talk about the fact that that is your response to being afraid of failure. So you freeze instead of making a bad decision. It shows up in really interesting ways. Here's the point. There is no brand of humanity, there is no brand of Christianity that does not experience fear. We talk about being unafraid. And it can be tempting to think that we get to this place where we live without any experience of fear. And I thought it's so important for us to stave off shame before it sets in. Whenever we go to Monday and something scared us, and because my kids love to do this. You walk in the house and they wait around the corner. Right? And that happens and you feel like, well, gosh, Lord, I have so much growing to do. I still get startled. No, fear is always going to be a part of the human experience. Again, completely fearless people are usually dead people because they didn't know not to poke a bear or to move away from that rattling sound in the bush or ask a woman her age or whatever. Okay. So, why would God say over and over again, do not be afraid? You put in us the fear instinct. And there's so many layers to the way this fear thing works in us. Are you saying never freeze? Are you saying don't flee ever? Don't flee? What does this mean? And I think it's really important for us to talk about that. Why would God say, do not be afraid? The problem with fear is never what you feel. It's what you choose. It's not what you feel. It's what you choose. The Bible is not saying, do not feel afraid. The Bible is saying, do not be owned by fear. Do not let fear dictate the decisions that you make with your life. Do not let fear be the fuel behind the decisions for your future. Do not be afraid. Living a little less afraid is about letting fear dictate what we do a little bit less. You were designed to feel fear. You were never designed to be led by it. And that is a monumental difference, which means if there's an area in your life in which fear is fueling or dictating the decisions that you're making, Jesus would step into that space and command you, do not be afraid. Stop letting fear dictate the decisions you make in that particular realm. And this will make sense a little bit as we look at a story that, again, is familiar. We've looked at this story several times here at Mission Point. If you have a copy of the Bible, you can turn to Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13. We're going to start looking at a section here in verse 27. Again, Israelites are God's chosen people. They've been miraculously set free from a 400-year stint of brutal slavery that we talked a little bit about last week. But God doesn't just pull them out of slavery in miraculous, glorious ways. He pulls them out of slavery with a promise. He makes a promise to them on oath. Not only am I taking you out of this broken place, but I promise I am leading you to a place of your own. I am going to give you a piece of real estate, a piece that you can call your own, a lush land described as flowing with milk and honey. You can call this place home, as this land called Canaan. So when we join the story, this newly liberated nation, the Israelites, have been kind of journeying through the wilderness for a while, and they're making their way towards the promised land, and now they're camped 11 days away from God's great promise when Moses, their leader, sends 12 men into their promised land to spy and bring back a report. Tell us what you find. Tell us what you see. Is it as good as Grandma said? Is it as great as God has promised? And so these 12 go in and they scope out the promised land, and they come back and they give a report. Verse 27, Numbers 13, right? They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does, true story, flow with milk and honey. Here's its fruit, but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. Ooh. Jump down to verse 31. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are, And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. And they said, the land we explored devours those living in it. This is the same land that flows with milk and honey. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from Nephilim. And we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And we looked the same to them. Here's how it works. These Israelite spies experience a threat of harm. They perceive a threat of harm, right? They explore this land and they run into these gigantic human beings who were believed to be half angels, massive, so large we look like grasshoppers, they said, compared to them. They are stronger than we are. And this place is their home right now. Translation: if they figure out that we are trying to evict their gigantic selves out of their home, perceived threat, they are going to crush us like the grasshoppers that we are. No deal. And so they came home and repeated the message of the giants, and dread took over the nation. Chapter 14, verse 1 says this: that night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. This is now how fear starts to show up in them. And all the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, their leaders, and the whole assembly said to them, man, if only we had died in slavery in Egypt, or even in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? This is the paranoia phase, by the way. Our wives, our children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back and volunteer ourselves to Egypt, back into slavery? Fear stirs in them a very clear flight response. The giants, they're too strong for us. They'll crush us. Let's run back to Egypt. Why? Because compared to this perceived threat, slavery was a better reality. Fear is funny like that. Oh man, it has a way of causing us to perceived threats end up being much more terrified than messy, broken, dysfunctional realities that God liberated you from. And all of a sudden you're like, what? God gets so angry with the Israelites for their fear response that he doesn't allow any of that generation except 2 people to enter the promised land. They spend the next 4 years wandering through the desert until their entire generation dies off. Millions of people never get to experience the promised land for themselves. Hear me, not because they felt afraid, but because they chose to let fear drive the decisions that they made. Being afraid of giants is totally understandable. The fear of the giants, though, started to drive their decisions. And here was God's deal with them. You are letting the fear of these giants dictate and drive your decisions more than you are letting my promises drive and dictate your decisions. Did you see what fear did to corrupt their perspective? All the land flows with milk and honey. And by the end of their conversation, all they can talk about the giants. Not the privileges God has promised them, not the promises of the privileges God has given them. All of a sudden, fear has taken over, and what's driving their decisions are giants, the perceived threat of the giants, not the promise that God made to them, and God is furious. When we talk about living a little less afraid, this is at the heart of the conversation. When fear leads you to choose anything other than what God has said, that's the biblical concern with fear. Because you are essentially saying the giants are greater than my God. The land is amazing. God, everything you said was cool and it was right, but the giants. God is great. The Red Sea thing that you did when you parted everything and we walked through, woo, that was good. But all of a sudden, we found something greater than you in those giants. The perceived threat has become greater than the promise you made to us. Spiritually, fear is a problem when it becomes more powerful than the promise of God, and it keeps you from the places God calls you to go. When he says trust and you say no, flee. Again, problem is not that we feel afraid. It's that fear drives us to fight when God says to trust, or to flee when God says to stand, or to freeze when God says to go. Here's the question again. What might it look like if you refuse to let fear of anything keep you from what God has promised you or called you to? What might your life look like? Give generously to those in need. I promise you, I will make sure you always are generously provided for. Whoa, whoa, whoa. God, I hear you, but what about the potential economic downturn and things could go wrong at any time? Every impulse in me says, freeze all spending. And I'm just wondering, is there an area where God is calling you to be more generous, but fear is dictating the decisions that you're making financially? I just wonder how your finances are being used, driven by fear or driven by faith in what God has said about your money. I'm just wondering. Because for many of us, money is a trigger. Forgive that person. Forgive that person. Man, a couple of months ago, I had two crazy people come to my office. One had a journal with like 2 or 3 pages, handwritten, filled out. And she said to me, I don't think I am able to rest until I give you every single thing on this page as it was given to me, because I believe you need to hear this. I'm like, okay. Number one, the Lord wants you to forgive this person, and named the person. There are places he wants to take you, but you cannot go until you forgive this person. Matter of fact, you've been held up because you've not forgiven this person. That was so interesting to me. And you know why? Because I'm sitting there thinking, there are actually people I dislike more than that person. I don't even feel the need to forgive this person. So why would I take any steps in that general direction? I'm not just asking you, by the way, I'm asking me. What areas of my life have the giants become greater than the promises of our great God? Is the fear of being taken advantage of or thought of as weak keeping you circling in the desert because you won't forgive? Do you know the perceived threat that's behind me choosing to? How is your own experience of the milk and honey of God's forgiveness stuck because of that? Or God calls us, love the stranger, and he says, Isaiah 59, and your breakthrough will come. Isaiah 58. Like the noonday sun. Yeah, but if I love that stranger, what if it's a trick for them to break in or hurt us or whatever else it is, or take advantage? Well, I will be with you. If I've called you to it, I will be with you. I wonder how this may be playing out in your life. Or maybe he's calling you to speak truth in love to someone you know is caught up in a situation that is sinful. And you've made excuses about it, where we don't have the relationship. Can you imagine if I stepped in and they'll be like, what right do you have? How dare you? And so I've just kept away from getting involved in that situation because the fear of their perception is greater than the promises and the places you are calling me to go. And for some of us, it's things like that we're afraid of, things like that, and we've made them greater than the promises of God and the adventures he's calling us to. Share the gospel. I've not done that for years. Why not? Work situation, Bible basher, like I don't want to, so I'm playing it safe because disciple your kids in my way. Not for their friendship, but for their future. No matter what they say, no matter what other parents say, or no matter what other parents are doing, no matter what's trending. I just wonder, what lands of milk and honey are you missing out on? Man, fear it's been so much more of a factor in my journey than I've realized. Even simple things like the fear to me of rejection, even from church people, on occasion will have me like, I feel like I did such a terrible job, like preaching. I'm gonna go run and hide somewhere. Fear of rejection. I don't know if I told you that two crazy people came into my office and one of them had a journal with pages filled. And one of the things she said was, and God is saying, it is time for you to lay hands on people again. I'm like, what? No, but I'm so concerned about what they may think about this, that. It's time for you to lay hands on your people again. Your ministry is going to be stuck if you don't do that. So you may have noticed, like in the recent number, if I'm here and there's nothing else happening, at the end of the service, I'm going to come right down there. Oh, so come on over. I will put my hand on you, just so you know. It is the most awkward and comfortable thing. And man, I wish I'm going so off script, but whatever. So, man, there was a number of weeks ago, a lady came with a man and said, I think you're supposed to pray for this man. I'm like, what's going on? Well, he's wearing this thing and he's going to have surgery because this thing is messed up and we're just wanting you to pray for a successful surgery. And I'm standing here and I'm like, I think maybe we're supposed to pray that he doesn't need the surgery at all. Like, okay, I mean, you can take a shot, whatever. I'm like, all right, let's pray. I heard a few days later, like, no, it's fixed, whatever happened inside. I'm like, for real? You're telling me there are places like this you want to take me to? Like, what? Okay, then let's go. I don't want fear to be a factor anymore. But it's so driven behind the scenes in ways I don't realize in me, in ways that I can label it something else, but at the end of the day, what it really is fear. Listen, if you have something that you need pray for, I will pray for it, and I will be surprised if it doesn't happen. But if your buck toe doesn't get fixed, I'm gonna sleep just fine. The Lord does all of that, right? I just know I want to be obedient to what it is he's calling me to. And there's still areas in my life where I'm like, don't know if I'm ready for that, Lord, but I don't want to spend my ministry circling in the desert. I wonder what things he may be inviting you to, or what promise you know he's made about your life. Go share the gospel. I will be with you till the very end of the age. Yeah, I know your presence is great, but their perspective, though. All right, I'm going to wrap up. Verse number 5, Numbers 14. Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land. They were part of the 12. Tore their clothes, and they said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into the land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only don't rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. I love it. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid. Their protection is gone. The Lord is with us. I love that. Josh and Cal over here, these two spies, they don't deny the threat. They saw the giants. They definitely feel afraid. That's not the issue. They just choose, and this is huge, they just choose to focus on and repeat a better report. They just choose the better report. I love this. They don't ask necessarily, what did we see? They acknowledge it. They don't ask necessarily, what did we feel? They don't ask the question, what could happen? Those are good questions. They ask the question, but what did God say? This is huge, because what God said is going to be the report that we repeat over and over again. Come on, reread the story and you will see it. The spies repeated the stories of the giants, and it spread throughout the entire Israelite community. Josh and Cal, they rip their clothes and they say, yeah, that's good. Let's not forget the bigger story. Let's not forget the better report. Can we please repeat that report over and over again? The greatness of our God. We will acknowledge the possibility of what might happen, but we will repeat the promises of what God will certainly do. And they choose to put his promises in play on repeat. And I love this. They live with almost this like, yeah, I feel you, fear, but what did God say? What if I fail? Yeah, you might. That's a possibility. But what has God said? Yeah, I feel you, fear. But man, I know God's plans to prosper me. I know his promise to be with me. What if I fail? Yeah, I feel you, but what has God said? But what if I kind of do what he said? But the power that raised Jesus from the dead is on the inside of you. And if he calls you to something, he will supply everything you need to perform it. What if my enemies take this country? Well, I know no weapon formed against me shall prosper. So I'm going to repeat that over and over and over again. Here's what I'm trying to tell you. Whenever fear shows up in your life, you are going to repeat one report or another. You are either going to repeat the report of dreadful possibilities, or you are going to repeat the report of God's glorious promises, which is one of the reasons why at this church we will consistently tell you, you've got to love and learn and lean into this book. His word, his promises, this is a report we've got to put on repeat over and over and over and over again. And can we be honest, we're living in a season right now where the reports that are being repeated in our culture, in our community, are reports of possible dread, and the church needs to rise up and start a pandemic of his promises. Wherever we go, his promises are being repeated. The questions we are asking is, ooh, what if God does what he said? What if God heals? What if God protects? What if God saves an entire movement of people? And we start to repeat his promises over and over and over again. One of the ways we take steps towards living life a little less afraid is really about what I choose to repeat in the moments when I know he's calling me to something and fear starts to ask the what if questions. And I wonder what it is he may be stirring in you about your family, about your work, or about whatever situation he may be calling you into. Lord, I pray that you would just bring us back to your word, bring us back to your promises, so that they are greater than the fears we feel. We will acknowledge that we are afraid. We will acknowledge that it's scary. But at the end of the day, Lord, help us to be a movement of people that say, yeah, but what has God said? And what drives and dictates our decisions will be your promises and what you're calling us to. Help us to live life a little less afraid in light of what you have said. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Hey, if you're newer, there'll be questions up on the screen for you to carry on this conversation. We really encourage you not to just let church end at church. Let's be the church, continue these conversations. And men, elders, if you're here, prayer team, if you're here and you want to come up, please come up front. If you need prayer for anything, please give us the opportunity to pray with you and trust that God will answer and say yes. Love you all. We'll see you all next time. Take care.